The bark all around the hole was rooted and crumbling. Cautiously, he put his fingers on the edge and he gave a slight tug. A good-sized piece of bark broke off in his hand, and with it came the bees. With a furious buzzing, they came pouring out of the broken hole. The humming grew to a roar like a great wind. Matt felt a sharp pain in his neck, and then another, and then another. The angry creatures swarmed along his hands and his bare arms, his hair, his face. How he got down from that tree, he never remembered. Water! If he could reach water, he could escape them. Bellowing and waving his arms, he plunged towards the pond. The bees were all around him. He could not see through the whirling cloud of them. The boggy ground sucked at his feet. He pulled one foot clear out of his boot, and then he went stumbling over sharp roots to the water's edge, and he flung himself forward. His foot caught in a fallen branch, and he wrenched it clear. Dazed with pain, he sank down into the icy shelter of the water. He came up, choking. Just above the water, the angry bees circled. So twice more he ducked his head and he held it down until his lungs were bursting. He tried to swim out into the pond, but his feet were tangled in dragging weeds. When he tried to jerk them free, a fierce pain ran up his leg, and he went down again, thrashing his arms wildly. And then something lifted him. His head came up from the water, and he gulped air into his aching lungs. He felt strong arms around him. Half conscious, he dreamed that his father was carrying him, and he did not wonder how this could be. Though his eyelids were almost swollen shut, he could see two figures bending over him. Unreal, half-naked figures with dark faces. And then, as his wits began to return to him, he saw that they were Indians, an old man and a boy. The man's hands were reaching for his throat, and in panic, Matt tried to jerk away. "Not move!" a deep voice ordered. "Bee needles. Have poison. Must get out." Matt was too weak to struggle. He could not even lift his head. Now that he was out of the cold water, his skin seemed to be on fire from head to toe. Yet he could not stop shivering. He had to lie helpless while the man's hands moved over his face, neck, and body. Gradually, he realized that they were gentle hands, probing and rubbing at one tender spot after another, and his panic began to die away. He could still not think clearly. Things seemed to keep fading before he could quite grasp them. He could not protest when the man lifted him again and carried him like a baby. It did not seem to matter where they were taking him, but shortly he found himself lying in his own bed in his own cabin. And he was alone. The Indians had gone. He lay too tired and sore to figure out how he came to be here, knowing only that the nightmare of whirling bees and choking water was past, and he was safe. And some time passed, and then once again the Indian was bending over him, holding a wooden spoon against his lips. He swallowed in spite of himself, even when he found it was not food, but some bitter medicine. And then he was left alone again, and he slept. Chapter 6. Finally, Matt woke, and he knew that he was well. His body was no longer on fire. He could open his eyes, and he saw the sunlight glinted through the chinks in the roof. All his familiar things were around him. The shelves with the pewter dishes, his jacket hanging on a peg. He felt as though he had been on a long journey and he had come home. He must have slept through half a day and a night. With the cabin door opened and the Indian entered, Matt hastily pulled himself up. And now, with clear eyes, he saw that there was nothing in the least strange about this man. He was dressed not so differently from Matt's own father, in a coat of some rough brown cloth and leggings fringed down the side. His face was smooth shaven, and so was his whole head, except for one long black top knot. When he saw that Matt was awake, his stern face was lighted by a wide smile.
Good.
It was half a word, half grunt.
White boy, very sick. Now well.
Matt remembered his father's advice. Good morning, he said respectfully. The Indian pointed a hand at his own chest.
Saknis, family of Beaver, he said.
He seemed to be waiting. I'm Matthew Hallwell, Matt answered.
Good. White man, leave you here.
Just for a while, Matt told him. He has gone to get my mother. It did not occur to him to lie to this old man as he had been. Moreover, he knew that there was something he had to say. He tried to find the right words. I'm grateful to you, he said finally. It was a very lucky thing that you happened to find me.
We watch. White boy, very foolish to climb bee tree.
So he had been right, Matt thought. That eyes were watching him from the forest. He was sure that the Indian had not asked him where he lived, and they had brought him straight home to this cabin. Even though he knew it was his good fortune they'd been watching him yesterday, he still felt somewhat resentful of their spying. Abruptly, he swung his feet to the floor, and he winced as a sharp pain ran up his leg. The Indian noticed. And moving closer, he took Matt's ankle between his hands and he gently pressed with his fingers. "Is it broken?" Matt asked.
"Nada. No broke. Mend soon. Sleep now. Not need medicine more."
The Indian had put something on the table as he came in. When he had gone, Matt hobbled over to see what it was and found a wooden bowl of stew, thick and greasy, flavored with some strange plant, wonderfully filling and strengthening. With it, there was a cake of cornbread, coarser than his own, but delicious. The next day, the Indian brought a boy with him.
"Nakwanes, you call grandson," he announced. "Ateen."
The two boys stared at each other. The Indian boy's black eyes held no expression whatsoever. Unlike the old man, he was naked except for a breechcloth held up by a string around his waist. It passed between his legs and hung down like a little apron in the front and back. His heavy hair fell straight to his shoulders.
"Ateen. Same winter as white boy, maybe?"
the man asked. He held up 10 fingers and then 4 more.
"I'm 13,
Matt answered, holding up his own fingers. At least, he excused himself, it would be true in another week. The Indian boy did not speak a word. Quite plainly, he had been brought here against his own will. He stared about the cabin, and he seemed to despise everything that he saw. He made Matt feel like a fool, sitting with his leg propped up on a stool. Matt steadied himself on his good leg and stood up. Now he noticed that Sackness was holding out to him a rough sort of crutch. Matt wished he did not have to try it right now, with both of them watching him. But he could see that the man expected it. He managed a few steps, furious at his own clumsiness. He had never imagined how pesky a crutch could be. Moreover, although there was not the slightest change in the boy's face, Matt was sure that Ateen was laughing at him. There was a nasty little gleam in the boy's eyes. And then, the moment they were gone, he seized the crutch in earnest, and very soon he could swing himself along at a good brisk pace. And now he was able to get outside of the cabin to check on the corn patch and bring in firewood. The trouble was, he had only one boot. The woolen stocking that his mother had knit for him was wearing thin. On the rough ground, it wore through in no time. This, too, the Indian noticed. And then his grandson came the next morning.
"No boot,"
he said, pointing. "I lost it," Matt answered. "It came off
in the mud when I was running. Once again, he felt ridiculous under the Indian boy's black stare. 3 days later, Sackness brought him a pair of moccasins. They were handsome and new, of moose hide, dark and glistening with grease, tied with stout thongs that were long enough to wrap around his ankles. "Beaver woman make," Sackness said. "Better white man's boots. White boy, see." Matt took off one boot and slipped on the moccasins. Indeed, they were better. In fact, they were wonderful. Not stiff like new leather boots. Not knobby or pinching anywhere. Light as nothing at all when he lifted his feet. No wonder Indians did not make a sound when they walked in the forest. And shame suddenly flooded over Matt. This man had perhaps saved his life, had come bringing food and a crutch, and now these beautiful moccasins. It wasn't enough just to say an awkward thank you. He needed to give something in return. Not money. There were a few silver coins in the box, but something made him very sure that he could not offer money to this proud old man. He looked about him in despair. There was almost nothing of his own in the cabin. And then he spied 2 books on the shelf, the only 2 his father had been able to carry into the wilderness. One was the Bible. He dared not give away his father's Bible. The other book was his own, the only one he had ever possessed. Robinson Crusoe. He had read it a dozen times, and he thought that parting with it was painful. But it was the only thing he had to give. He hobbled across the room and took it down from the shelf. And he handed it out to the Indian. Sackness stared at it. "It's for you," Matt said. "It's a gift. Please, take it." Sackness reached out and took the book in his hand. He turned it over and over slowly, his face showing not a sign of pleasure. Then he opened it and stood peering at a page. With shame, Matt saw that he was holding it upside down. He couldn't read. Of course he couldn't. Matt should have known that. He had made a terrible mistake, and he embarrassed the good man. He had heard once that the one thing an Indian could not forgive was a hurt to his pride. He felt his own face burning. But Sackness did not look embarrassed. His dark stare went from the book to Matt's face. "White boy? No signs?" he asked. Matt was puzzled. Yes, Matt admitted. I can read it. And for a long moment, the Indian studied the book. And then, astonishingly, the rare white smile flashed. Good, he grunted. Saknus, make treaty. A treaty? Matt was even more puzzled. Nakwanis, hunt. Bring white boy bird and rabbit. White boy, teach a teen. White man's sign. You mean I should teach him to read? Good. White boy, teach a teen what books say. Doubtfully, Matt looked from the old man to the boy, who stood silently listening. His heart sank. The scorn in the boy's face had turned to black anger. Nada! The furious word exploded. The first word that Matt ever heard him speak. Half under his breath, he muttered a string of incomprehensible words. His grandfather's stern face did not change. He was undisturbed by the boy's defiance. A teen, learn, he said. White men, come more and more to Indian land. White man not make treaty with pipe. White man make signs on paper. Signs Indian not know. Indian put mark on paper to show him friend of white man. Then white man take all the land. Tell Indian cannot hunt on land. A teen learn to read white man's signs. A teen not give away hunting ground. The boy glowered at his grandfather, but he did not dare to speak again. And with a black scowl, he stalked out of the cabin. Good, said Saknus calmly. Then he handed the book back to Matt. Ateen, come, Siba. Tomorrow. And we'll read chapter 7 next time.